Yesterday, while I was in the car with Papa Bear driving to my eye injection appointment in a city 2 hours away from Wilderness, and incidentally the same city that my eldest daughter Raven lives in, our Prime Minister here in Canada, Justin Trudeau, resigned. Papa Bear and I listened to his speech and the questions afterwards in both French and English on our national radio, the CBC. Then today, Papa Bear and I were watching CNN, as we often do. During a lengthy speech, the American president-elect renewed and intensified his threats toward my country, Canada. He has threatened to make Canada into a state of the USA, and he seems to have been emboldened by what he perceives as our vulnerability due to the leadership race that will now occur in our reigning party, the Liberal Party of Canada. The repercussions of these occurrences will be serious, and I know that many of us here in Canada will be very upset. Because of Trump's threats, the election that will almost certainly occur here after the Liberal Party chooses our new Prime Minister will be very different. And there are now some opportunities that we might be able to take advantage of. Maybe. So right now, I'm going to talk about these occurrences and some of my thoughts about them, and I will tell you what I think these opportunities might be. So grab yourself some nice hot beverage and curl up here with me next to the fire as I chat about the politics that are happening around us all. Whether you are Canadian like I am, or an American like so many of my dear friends, or you are a friend from any other country in the world. We'll talk about what these things could mean for all of the radical homemakers like us here on Rematriate.
Storms they come, they go.
Hello, Radical Homemakers. Welcome back. Pull up a chair here by the fire and warm your bones. I'm here at home, Wilderness, right now because I'm recuperating from a surgery on one of my arthritis-riddled hands. As those of you who know me well will remember, my health is significantly degraded. One of the very common consequences for survivors of severe domestic abuse is that we develop autoimmune disorders at a very high rate. And we also often have physical injuries from what our husbands have done to us. I have had several head injuries, and I've developed a second autoimmune disorder in addition to the asthma that I was diagnosed with as a teenager. It's a rare form of diabetes called latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, or adult onset type 1. And yeah, I've got arthritis in my hands. This is a contributing factor to why an injury to my hand in February of 2022 did not heal, and why I had to have a screw put into my finger a couple of weeks ago in December. And it's because of the diabetes that I have very severe diabetic retinopathy, and I have to have regular injections into my eyes in order to prevent blindness. And also why I've had a small amputation on my left foot and a fracture and deformation of my right foot. So it's because of my bad health that I was in the car with Papa Bear driving for several hours to get my eye injections. And this is also why I was able to listen to Justin Trudeau's whole speech on the radio, and why I was at home to watch Trump's hour-long speech where he went on at length about how he's going to make Canada a state and his good buddy Wayne Gretzky into our governor. Yeah, there's definitely always a part of me that wants to laugh at the man. The absurdity is right off the chart. But because of my 20 some odd years of dealing with my now ex-husband, father demon, I know very well that you should always take a narcissist very seriously. I have had to learn that lesson the hard way. So let me talk to you about what I think all of this means. Once I've explained the background, I can tell you what I think the opportunity is now for Canadians in the face of the very real threat that Trump poses to our economy. I've always felt a closeness to our Prime Minister who just resigned, to Justin Trudeau. We were both born on December 25th, 1971, and we both grew up with Justin's dad, Pierre Trudeau, as our Prime Minister. I've always thought of Justin as sort of a brother for this reason, although obviously he has never met me, poor guy. When Justin first entered politics a little over 10 years ago, I was at a stage in my life where I was thoroughly disgusted with the party that I had been loyal to my whole life. The NDP were our party when I was a child because my mom worked for the nurses union and my stepfather worked for CUPE, which is the union for ambulance drivers. The NDP was solidly the party of unions, the most socialist of our parties. As far left as you could get in Canada with a major party. We've always had communists, but they've never been a real alternative. As the third party, the NDP had never even been the official opposition, but it was the party that, under the leadership of Tommy Douglas, had given us health care. Most Canadians think of Tommy Douglas as the greatest Canadian because he was always devoted to the service of his people. First, as a Christian minister in very rural Saskatchewan before he entered politics, and then later as premier of that province, and eventually the federal leader of the New Democratic Party. And it was as federal NDP leader that he fought so hard for us to get us our treasured healthcare system. It is because of Tommy Douglas that I was able to have all of my surgeries and treatments. It is because of Tommy Douglas that I am still alive. Those of us who were devoted to the NDP always thought of it as the party of Tommy Douglas and of the deeply compassionate leader of my own youth, Ed Broadbent. There were many very good men in the party's history. One of those good men was Jack Layton. I worked on Jack Layton's first campaign for federal office when he became the leader of the federal NDP. I was very loyal for so many years to my party, even after Jack was killed by cancer, and it didn't look like we would ever get any further than the success that he brought us by winning opposition status. I was still loyal. I was loyal right up until they threw women and the gay community under the party bus driven by male sex fetishists. And the Green Party has done the same thing too. So I couldn't turn to them anymore. I despaired of being involved in politics at all. There was no one on the left to vote for. And those on the right were racist on top of being sexist and, frankly, fascist as well. They were also the party in power at the time, under Stephen Harper. When Justin went into politics, he was the only hope to shut Stephen Harper down. Harper was a right-wing a-hole. If you're curious about Canadian politics, go look him up. I'm just going to say what I said, and I'm going to leave it at that. What you need to know, we all wanted Harper gone. So we all held our noses, and we moved to the center, and we voted for Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party. We did it to get rid of Harper. And we also did it because Justin was promising a conversion of our voting system away from the first-past-the-post electoral system to a proportional representation system like the ones used in Europe. This is the primary reason that I voted for him, despite the fact that he also wanted to legalize cannabis, which I was much less in favor of. I figured if we could get proportional rep, that pressure could be put on all politicians to have positions that were more about justice and less about kowtowing to corporations to get enough power to gain a majority. With proportional rep, there's never a majority. Every government is always a coalition of smaller parties, and compromises required for everything. Proportional rep is actually what enabled the Green Party in Europe to make some real gains. So 10 years ago, I thought this might be the answer. 10 years ago, I thought there was more possibility that politics could help us make the kinds of changes that we needed to make. I know better now. The 10 years since I first voted Liberal and first voted for Trudeau have held so much change. I have been both disgusted and pleased by what Justin has done. I was disgusted that the one promise he kept was to legalize cannabis. Not really surprised, though. Keeping the populace complacent with dope is a terrific tactic in the war to maintain the status quo. But lavish use of intoxicants is not a practice that is congruent with the development of mental health on an individual level or on a community level. So I know that encouraging the use of drugs is not a good policy. I was also disgusted that he gave up so quickly on restructuring our voting system to make it more democratic. It was abandoned after only a few months. He claimed in his speech yesterday that he tried really hard to make the changes, but to be honest, I really don't see any reason to believe him. I'm also disgusted at the way that Justin pushes further globalization of trade, and especially the way that he has been pushing pipelines against the will of our First Nations people that he claimed to support while talking reconciliation, and at the same time locking up elders trying to protect their homelands from the forces of big oil. Although I will never excuse Justin for doing it, I do understand why he behaved this way. The forces of big oil, headquartered in Alberta, were his father's most successful opponents. Justin didn't want them to destroy him too. It was big oil in Alberta and new right-wing leader Brian Mulroney who combined to put an end to Pierre Trudeau's progressive policies. And Justin is unconsciously a believer in Brian Mulroney's agenda of pushing big business and destroying working people through the globalization of free trade. Although, of course, Justin doesn't call it that any more than Bill Clinton would ever admit that he was a believer in Reagan's agenda that was exactly the same as his good buddy Mulroney and their shared good buddy Thatcher. I don't know British politics well enough to say who the equivalent would be there by name, but I do know that an economic agenda that focuses on liberalization and globalization of trade, like Thatcher espoused, has been pushed there by those pretending to be leftists. I know this because it has occurred everywhere around the world. But at least here in Canada, back in my teenage years, and for quite a while afterwards, those on the left were fighting against free trade. That's the policy of Mulroney that we hated the most. We wanted to defend Canada from what would happen to us if our economy was too tightly tied to the United States. We wanted to become more self-sufficient, not less. All these supposed leftists have pushed the right-wing agenda of the 1980s even further than Reagan, Thatcher, and Mulroney could ever have dreamed. Frankly, I suspect that Pierre Trudeau would be disgusted by the way his son has been pushing globalized free trade as if he was raised by Brian Mulroney rather than by his actual father, Pierre Trudeau. For American friends who aren't familiar with our Canadian history, I will very briefly explain who Pierre Trudeau was so that you'll understand more about the world that his oldest son, Justin, grew up in. Pierre Trudeau was our Prime Minister from 1968 until 1979. He lost one election and was leader of the Loyal Opposition for 1 year, and then he won another election and was Prime Minister again from 1980 until 1984. So he was at the forefront of Canadian politics from the 1960s right through until the 1980s. He was very popular and considered to be quite attractive and progressive. He had something of the same kind of cachet as your Jack Kennedy did. And he began in politics during Kennedy's time, but he was in power much longer than Kennedy ever was. 15 years total as Prime Minister, first for 11 years and then for 4 more. He was also responsible for the final part of our Constitution here in Canada, because until he brought our full sovereignty, we were technically still a colony of Britain. The importance of Pierre Trudeau is quite monumental. Trudeau was still in power during Jimmy Carter's presidency, and he also had much the same kind of appeal that Jimmy had. They were both progressive, both all about working for human rights, and they were both closely tied to pop culture and to popular music of the time. Jimmy Carter and Pierre Trudeau were both very cool. So yeah, very similar in those ways. But Trudeau was a communist in his youth, and he never professed any kind of faith. And of course, Carter was a devout Christian and never espoused anything like the far left policies that our Trudeau was known and loved for. Those of us who here in Canada who are part of the age group that is commonly called Generation X, we grew up with Trudeau in power. We didn't know any other prime minister. He is inextricably tied in our minds with the zeitgeist of our youth and our image of ourselves as Canadians. Canada is very closely tied to America, and we experience so many of the same kinds of political waves that America does. So, in the same way that Ronald Reagan ended years of leftist progress by defeating Carter, Brian Mulroney ended years of leftist progress in Canada when he became Prime Minister after Trudeau. Justin grew up with his dad in power. He was raised in the spotlight and learned many lessons from watching all of these occasions. When he became Prime Minister himself, he already had a lifelong relationship with many of the heads of state around the world, and especially with the British royal family. Justin and I are the exact same age, but we grew up so very differently. So, of course, Justin wasn't an activist in the 80s fighting free trade and colonialism like I was. He wasn't out there like me pushing for peace and an end to the threat of nuclear war in his high school. No. He went to an all-boys private school founded by Jesuit priests. He was certainly never a street kid like I was. He was never beaten up by cops. He lived a life of fame and comfort and complete immersion in the cosmology of those in power. And he learned the lessons that those at the top of the pyramid of power learn. Rather than suffer under poverty like I did, he had to watch his father's legacy destroyed by the forces of big oil and free trade. And he watched the triumph of right-wing pro-business ideologues who preached the nonsensical idea that the only way to help the poor is to constantly grow the economy. Seeing their triumph over progressives will have reinforced all these lessons in his mind. So Justin believed, whether consciously or unconsciously, that to gain and maintain political power, you have to stroke the backs of political and corporate fat cats. And he believed that his father wasn't able to make more of the kind of changes that he wanted to make because those fat cats ended his political career. And that's why Justin engaged in the kind of decision-making that he did and pursued the agenda that he did. This is why I say that I am disgusted, but not surprised by the way that Justin Trudeau has used his political power. I've actually learned quite a lot from watching him. I now understand that because political power is dependent upon appeasing those who hold true power, that there is very little that can be done to change the status quo. Those who hold true power will not allow it. They will end the political career of any who try to make real change. The longer a political career goes on, the less likely it is that any politician will ever make any kind of real positive change. And now, Justin has made the decision to end his own career. I don't think that his timing is a coincidence at all. I don't think that Trump threatening Canada immediately after Justin resigns is a coincidence either. Because Trump is a narcissist. He will always attack those that he perceives as vulnerable. And he will perceive Justin's decision as an admission of vulnerability. But Justin knows this. He grew up walking the halls of power. Justin was prime minister the last time that Trump was president. He has watched him, and he has enjoyed poking fun at him along with other heads of state. In Canada, we have seen the videos of Justin and other powerful people laughing at Trump at international events. And of course, the last time that Trump was president, he forced a renegotiation of the free trade agreement between Canada and America. So yeah, Justin knows very well exactly what Trump is, and he can see what is likely to happen over the next several years. And Justin also had a private meeting with Trump a short while ago after Trump won re-election. Trump has been crowing about what he claims occurred during that meeting. He has been claiming that Justin said certain things. I don't think it's very likely that the meeting went down exactly the way Trump says that it did, but we can learn a lot about how Trump thinks if we pay attention to the messages behind his lies. I suspect that Justin looked at the series of events that are most likely to occur over the next few years, and he decided that he wasn't able himself to deal with his future and yet still remain in power. What I suspect is that Justin knows this truth. He knows that it is fighting for re-election that destroys the ability of any politician to take risks and to speak out. A right wing here in Canada and the forces of big oil have been trying to take Justin down for quite a while now. So his strategy of stroking the fat cats wasn't working for him anymore. He knew he was going to have to make a decision soon. And I suspect that it was the meeting with Trump that pushed him to decide to resign when he did. A political commentator on our Canadian TV is actually the one that inspired me to be able to see this. He pointed out that once your political career is at a point where you will no longer seek re-election, you are completely free, and in many ways, you have the most power that you will ever have. It occurred to me that Justin knew that he would need this kind of freedom, this kind of power, in order to deal with the threat that Trump poses to Canada. I suspect that this is why he chose to resign right now. He did it so that he could respond to Trump exactly as he wanted to and have no political consequences to contend with. The tweet that Justin published on X in response to Trump was absolutely brilliant. It was such clear evidence of Justin's new freedom of speech. Justin said that there wasn't a snowball's chance in hell that Canada would ever be an American state. That really gave me a good laugh. But the really funny part, the part that Papa Bear and I both saw immediately in Trump's speech, Trump actually gave the Liberal Party a huge boost by saying he liked our current right-wing leader, Pierre Poilievre, much better than Justin. Trump said that if Poilievre was prime minister, it would be much easier for Trump to take over Canada. By saying that, Trump may very well have handed the next election to the Liberals. Canadians don't agree on many things, but the absolute top of the list of the very few things that we do all agree on, we are not American. We are our own country. And by cheering on Poilievre and telling Canadians that Poilievre will be a pushover, that Poilievre will make it easy for Trump to destroy our country, Trump is crushing his hope of becoming prime minister. I'm certain that Trump isn't aware of this. He doesn't have enough knowledge about Canada or enough political savvy to be aware of this. And I don't think Justin knew Trump would say this. Trump is completely unpredictable. But it's just a huge bonus for Justin after sacrificing himself. So, that's the first opportunity that Canadian people now have. We have a greater opportunity to avoid Pierre Poilievre, who is a right-wing wacko of American proportions. Poilievre has long since demonstrated clearly what a gigantic fan of Donald Trump he really is. And now that Trump has attacked Canada, many Canadians will be inclined to discard him. Don't get me wrong. I do not think that this will save Canada. Those of you who watched my last video, the love letter to American friends, will know what I told you about the fact that civilization is already ending and that this is actually a good thing. You will know that just like America can't be saved, Canada can't be saved. The nation state is one of the institutions that maintains Wetiko culture and fosters and feeds on the murder of our planet and on every injustice and atrocity that can be named. Canada cannot be saved, and Canada should not be saved. We can only have lives of happiness and sustainability, lives of justice, lives of peace, once Wetiko culture is ended. And when Wetiko culture is ended, there will be no more nation states. But I would very much like it if we were to transition away from Wetiko culture in a way that causes less suffering and destruction. I would prefer it if we went out with a whimper rather than a bang. And the right wing in Canada and everywhere else is absolutely intent on sucking as much life out of every human and non-human child of Mother Earth as they can. They won't stop until they have destroyed everything, including our climate and most of the non-human species that we share our beautiful planet with. All our relations that share our home and our lives. These are the full-blown Wetiko people who are determined to profit from suffering. And the more suffering, the better, because the more suffering, the more profit. And they will tell everyone whatever lies they need to tell them to make sure that they can do this. Before Justin resigned, it really looked like Poilievre was going to be our next prime minister. He is very good at telling all the right lies to everyone in order to gain power. But when Trump made his speech and said Poilievre would make it easy for Trump to take over Canada, what a blow. Canadians won't stand for treachery. So that's the first opportunity. We have an opportunity to avoid a federal government that would cause greater harm to our peoples and greater harm to our lands than if any other government were to be formed. The other opportunity is more difficult to understand, and I'm sure that some of you will think I am a complete wacko for suggesting it. So I'm going to go full wacko, and I'm just going to throw it out there in front of you all. The craziest possible statement that you could ever hear. Now, put down your teacups first. Okay, here it is. I think that Brexit, that Britain removing itself from the European Union and ending their involvement in that free trade agreement was, in fact, a very good idea, and that it will save the people of Britain from a great deal of suffering. Are we all okay? No spilled drinks? Okay. Yeah, I know. The British economy is going to crumble because they have pulled themselves out of the great mainstream of free trade. There are already hardships occurring. People can't afford to buy fresh fruit and veg, even if they can find it in the shops. It's entirely awful. But this is the thing. Awful is inevitable. Our entire global economy is a giant house of cards. And it's built on a foundation of cheap fossil fuel and on externalizing all the losses and privatizing the gains as profits held by an ever smaller and ever richer fraction of the 1% holding power over us all. Yes, this absolutely is the world that we live in. A world of powerful billionaires that got that way by exploiting any and every human and non-human child of our Mother Earth. But you already know this. You're radical homemakers. That's why you're here on Rematriate, because you know that the world we live in is utterly unjust and that it has broken you, and it has broken everyone that you know, and broken everyone that you love. Wetiko culture is like a cancer or a parasite, sucking up all the resources, all the life, and it will keep going until it kills the host, kills our entire planet, or until we stop it. It is holding us hostage like an abusive husband that has seduced us with lies. The big lie that we have an opportunity to escape from right now in Canada is that free trade with America will save us. Just like Britain had an opportunity to escape from free trade with Europe, and they took it. Even though they didn't realize that that was what they were doing at the time. Much of the motivation for Brexit was, in fact, racism. But the fact remains that an economic strategy based on trade is based on the ability to continue trade. And trade is only feasible if cheap transport is available and if the financial system is stable enough to provide funding and insurance against risk. Cheap transport is entirely dependent on cheap oil, and financial stability is now utterly dependent on continuing trade providing a sufficient return on investment in order to secure debt taken on to support trade. Oh yeah, it really is that circular and that fragile. Remember 2008? The global crash of the economy that started in America and then spread? The crash that would have been so much worse if billions of dollars hadn't been pumped into the economy by governments? 2008 was not an anomaly, and it was not solved by all the money that was printed to solve it. Yeah, that's where money comes from. It's conjured up with a magic wand and a few computer keystrokes. See, this is the thing. When we create money, or as financial experts call it, when we print our way out of a crisis, that money is created, is printed as a debt. And this means that in order to pay off that debt, the economy has to grow. It has to grow to earn enough to pay back the debt and enough to pay back the interest. And the economy is almost completely tied, over 98% tied to the energy and the materials required to produce goods and services. So money is created by mining, and money is created by drilling for oil. And trade is dependent on creating money, which is dependent on growing the economy, which is dependent on ever more and more energy and ever more and more materials. There is a wonderful scholar named Nate Higgins who explains all of this with a great deal of credibility. He began his career as a financial analyst and then went back to school and got a PhD in ecological economics. I will include a link in the description of this video to his short film, The Great Simplification. This film explains all of the ways that our entire economic system and cosmology is flawed and doomed. Nate explains the way that our enslavement to perpetual growth is doomed to collapse, or, as he calls it, the Great Simplification. Now, I don't agree with everything that Nate says. He doesn't understand as much of our history and herstory and evolution as he thinks that he does. But this is a minor flaw, and it doesn't take away from how beautifully explains how insane our economy really is. Our economy is like a really complicated con game. It's like a pyramid scheme. It's a financial bubble. And the only way to evade the destruction inevitably caused by the collapse of the pyramid is to get out before the bubble bursts. Just like the only way to end the power of an abuser is to finally decide to leave the relationship with that abuser. And with Trump threatening Canada, threatening to use the economic power that America wields over us due to our trade relationship, we are faced with that choice right now. If we maintain our relationship, if we remain trapped in mutual economic dependency, the abuse continues. We have been trapped in this relationship since 1989. Pierre Trudeau brought our Constitution home in 1982. In many ways, this was like our divorce from Britain. We weren't a colony anymore. We were able to make our own decisions, and we could engage in trade with anyone or with no one, whatever we decided. But rather than remain single, Brian Mulroney rushed us headlong into a marriage with America where the vast majority of our trade went across that southern border. Now, it's true that we had been dating or perhaps flirting before a divorce from Britain. We had the Auto Pact and other agreements, but Mulroney sold us into indentured servitude. Because of the free trade agreement and later the expansion to the NAFTA agreement, we no longer have the ability to make our own decisions and just look after our own selves. This is why Trump's threat to use economic power to end our sovereignty is quite credible. And this is why I say that we now have another opportunity. An opportunity to do the same thing that Britain did with Brexit and pull ourselves out of this trade agreement. The last time that Trump was president, he took a major temper tantrum and he canceled the previous free trade agreement between our two countries. Justin's government had to renegotiate in order to not crash the economy because we are dependent on being able to sell our energy and our goods to America. It wasn't easy, as negotiating with a narcissist is never easy. There is no such thing as negotiating in good faith with a narcissist. Believe me, that's another lesson that I had to learn the hard way. The best that you can hope for is that you can maintain enough stability for long enough that you can quietly plan in the background in order to escape from the relationship. When a woman decides to leave her abusive male partner, she has to plan over a very long time to be able to get out successfully. She has to make this plan so that when the opportunity appears, she can take it. She has to play the long game. She has to work away quietly in the background and never warn her abuser because stealth is her greatest tool. If the abuser is happy and stable and thinks everything is okay, then he is not on the attack and using his destructive power to maintain control of her. He is just quietly going about his business, and she has a little bit of wiggle room to set up the resources required for escape and then independence. In order for Canada to get out of our abusive relationship, where America wields so much power over us, we should have taken advantage of any stability to plan for our escape and independence. When we renegotiated our trade agreement with Trump, we were given only a very little amount of time in which to do that planning. And then the pandemic hit. On many occasions during the pandemic, trade across the border was stopped because the border was closed. Everyone was focused on dealing with that crisis quickly and then getting back to normal. No one in power has recognized that crisis for what it was. It was no more an anomaly than 2008 was, but we were too distracted to be able to see the long game. Some people were partially aware of the fact that we were too dependent on fragile global supply chains, and there were some small changes made to ensure that we were producing some of the things that we really need within our own nations. But there were almost no nations who were even thinking about withdrawing from globalized trade, except Britain, where they had already had their referendum back in 2016 and decided to exit the European Trade Union. Basically, they got out of the pyramid scheme really early. The bubble didn't burst completely in 2008, but the writing was definitely on the wall. It is wise to get as many of your eggs out of the basket as possible once you realize that the bottom of the basket is rotting. I get the impression from my many British friends that this isn't actually why Brexit happened, that it was basically a white nationalist movement, and essentially it was xenophobia that propelled this movement to success. But the fact remains that since globalized trade is a bubble doomed to burst, getting out of that bubble beforehand is going to save you from the destruction, which will inevitably occur when it does burst. And that's the opportunity that we have in Canada right now. It's not ideal because we haven't been planning our escape, but you don't always have the luxury of being able to escape on your own terms. Sometimes you get thrown out, and instead of trying to fix the relationship, you decide that since you're out now, why throw good money after bad? Stay the heck out and walk away. Because if you get back in to try and save what you've lost, all you can do is lose even more. When you live with a narcissist abuser, you learn eventually that any agreement that you have with them isn't going to be honored. They're going to lie to you, and they're going to still do everything that they promised never to do, and they're definitely going to pull any rug that you're foolish enough to stand on right out from under you. And by discarding the last trade agreement that we made with him, that's exactly what he did. Trump pulled the rug right out from underneath of us. Because we were standing on that rug rather than quietly packing our bags while his back was turned. We had 4 years with Biden in power, and we could have used that time to plan our escape, especially since trade had already been interrupted and everyone had recognized the importance of localizing supply chains. We didn't do that. We didn't take that opportunity. But we assumed that the agreement we made with the narcissist, with Trump, could be relied upon, and that everything was safe. And now he's not even inaugurated yet, and he's already not only thrown away the agreement, but he's threatening to economically destroy our country. But we need to recognize what this is. This is not a disaster that could not have been predicted. This is the opportunity. We have been beaten up and publicly humiliated. We have been told very clearly that we aren't needed, and that only if we become an obedient slave will he even have anything to do with us. So, we need to walk away. He doesn't need our milk, or our cars, or anything at all from us. That's what he said. So we should immediately stop sending him anything. When an abusive man beats the tar out of you in public and shames and insults you and says that he doesn't want you anymore, the absolute last thing that you should ever do is run around behind him begging him to take you back. Don't try to convince him that the relationship is important and that it's good for him to have you around. Just cut your losses and turn around and leave. It won't be easy, but at least it is an end. And at least he can't hurt you anymore. The life that you build now will at least be finally entirely your own. This is the opportunity that Canada has right now. We have an opportunity to escape because we are the ones being thrown out. We don't have to go through the process of having a referendum to do can exit. We don't have to do anything except decide to be done. We just decide that we won't go begging at Trump's knee to be allowed back in. We can cut off the flow of energy to the USA. We sell a lot more than electricity to Americans, but we do sell more than $3 billion worth of electricity. I could be wrong because I'm not an expert, but I have heard that a large chunk of the electricity used in New York State comes from Canada. Apparently, Trump says he doesn't need anything from Canada. Fine. Let's disconnect the power grid. Yeah, it would mean short-term hardship. But for Pete's sake, we're already living with that hardship because every tiny bump or hiccup in the American economy is amplified here. I mean, many of our factories can't even follow our calendar of holidays here because they are so closely tied to American factories. Workers are forced to take unpaid days off and also then to work on our holidays. That is one small example. There are so many others. And this is how it has been since 1989. We've been married for 36 years now, and we should be able to recognize that we desperately need a divorce. It's never going to get better. And we're now being thrown out of the marital home. So, let's end this marriage. Let us end free trade. Ending free trade between Canada and the US would not be all the changes that we need to make to change our way of life. It isn't enough. We will still need to do more. But it is an absolutely necessary step that must be taken. If we can take this opportunity and simplify our economy before the great simplification that Nate Higgins tells us is coming, it would decrease the amount of suffering and destruction here. it will be a really large part of us going out with a whimper rather than a bang. Now, I'm not a fool. I know that it's not likely to happen. This is why I say maybe. But who would have ever imagined that Brexit would happen? And who would have imagined that Americans would re-elect a man who attempted a coup d'etat the last time that he was president? There are so many things occurring which would never have been predicted because of a failure of imagination. Nate Higgins has a terrific line in his film. He says that in order for us to move forward into a way of life that is peaceful and sustainable, we need people who aren't limited by seeing through the lens of economics or through other very specific lenses. He says that we need people who can see the big picture and the way that all of the factors interact. He says that we need people who see with systems lenses. That's what I believe that we radical homemakers have to offer. We are capable of seeing the big picture. Many of us here are survivors of male pattern violence, or as it is named more often, domestic violence. This is why I use that metaphor, because I know so many of you will really understand it. And although it is true that none of us hold true power over things like political and economic decisions, so that we can not ourselves ensure that we take advantage of this opportunity, which is now available to Canada. There is still so much that can be done. If there is a politician brave enough to point Canada towards a withdrawal from free trade, you now know why it's a good idea, and you can support that politician. If you see any other places where your support can push us in this direction as a country, you can take that opportunity. But in our own lives, there are many more opportunities which we do have the power to take advantage of. We can each start to understand the way that such opportunities can be taken advantage of in order to allow us to make our own escape from Wetiko culture, to get our own selves out before the bubble bursts. By learning to see that escape is necessary, our eyes are opened, and then we can each start to make our own escape plans. By understanding that abusive relationships don't just occur between individuals, but also on a larger systems level, we can start to rearrange our lives to work towards being free of all such relationships. Once you end abusive relationships, you are free to weave a web of caring, healthy, mutual interdependence. Once you begin the process of freeing yourself from Wetiko culture, once you are focused on escape, your life can begin to transform. You can begin the process of creating a new life. The life that you build now can be entirely your own. The home that you build now can be entirely your own. I'm now going to repeat some of my message from the Love Letter to Americans video, because I want Canadians to hear it as well. And frankly, it's a message that applies to all of us. We are all of us, all humans, and all non-humans on our Mother Earth, suffering the consequences of living in a way of life that is unjust, unsustainable, not peaceful, and not contributing to anyone's joy. We can do better. We start first and always with ourselves. That's how we make the change. First, we get healthy, and then we find healthy ways of life. What that will look like in regards to the issues discussed in this video is escaping from economic dependencies that are part of globalized trade. If we make a plan to not be reliant on trade for our own financial support, then we are not trapped in an abusive relationship with the forces intent on destroying our planet. For instance, having a job that won't disappear if you can't sell your goods or services to another country. Ideally, all our jobs should be completely local, and be about providing a good or a service to those within your same ecosystem. But it takes time and stability to make those kinds of changes. All we can do is all we can do, but we should always have our eyes on the true goal. Tactics must be in service of strategy. And the strategy is not to succeed within this economic system, but rather to escape from it. So, it is by escaping that we can begin to find healthy ways of life. And it is by finding healthy ways of life that we can escape. And we also do what we can to help others to heal. And then we make ourselves a home. Take a look around you. Take a look at the land where you live. That is your home. Canada is not important. Your land is what is important. We belong to the land. Make your dedication, make your loyalty to your land, and make it your home. Make in yourself a home for yourself. Make in yourself a home for those who you love. Make in yourself a home for an understanding that it is all about the web of care. Make ourselves a home. This is what homemakers do. And we are radical homemakers. I wish you peace. I wish you joy. I wish you escape. Know that I love you.
Something about you isn't right. I swear you can make me lose my mind. Lying here awake at night. If this is love, then I don't want it. Why you gotta be so complicated? I'm sick and tired of contemplating. I don't wanna be here waiting. If this is love, then I don't want it. I can't be the one you keep running to whenever you feel down. I can't be that someone who'll always be there when something's wrong. I can't rely on you now. I can't rely on you anymore. I can't depend on you now. I can't rely on you. Why is everything so problematic? Why are you acting so neglected? It feels so cold and unaffected. Swear to God that I don't want this. No. Something about you isn't right. Swear you can make me lose my mind. Lying here awake at night. If this is love, then I don't want it. I can't be the one you keep running to whenever you feel down. I can't be that someone who'll always be there when something's wrong.